But saving the manuals isn't just about buying the manuals. So you want to save the manuals. Well, there's a wrong way to go about that, and it's kind of the path I've seen everybody taking. They put this hyper masculine macho edge on the manual transmission, but if you really want to keep manual transmissions alive, and I know we're looking at my DCT M3, and for those of you who are new here, don't worry, I own two manual cars. I've got an old Porsche 911 and an E39 M5, both manual, and I love them. And this is my first DCT car. If you want to keep the manuals alive, you've got to be strategic about your fight. Porsche removed manuals from the GT3 and the 991 generation in the .1, and it came back because people wanted to row their own gears. For the most part, in every other car, manuals are obsolete. They don't make any sense. They're not as fuel efficient as automatics are today, and of course we have some loud power equipment while I'm trying to film this. But we always preferred the manual transmission because automatic transmissions weren't that good. They kind of sucked. They were laggy. They didn't shift when you wanted them to. They just didn't do the thing you wanted them to do as a driver. But today, DCT does exactly that. And even on relatively low budget cars, it used to be that you had to go buy the Ferrari. And they started out like dogs. You had the F1 gearbox on the F355. Not exactly exciting performance today. But eventually we got the DCT dual clutch gearboxes across the board. So from a 458 Italia to a Volkswagen GTI. And on this M3, the DCT suits the car perfectly. And that's why I bought this car in a DCT. Not because I'm anti-save the manuals. I bought this car in a DCT because it made more sense for the application. We've also really got to stop calling the clutch the man pedal. I know it's in a meme and it's kind of cute, but that kind of like fragility is so silly and useless, and it doesn't win any fights. And the other thing is, I mean, moms all over the world have taught their sons and daughters how to drive a stick. It's not a masculine thing. It's just a machine. So the thing that caught my attention with the DCT was driving it. My mom actually bought her E90 M3 competition package before I bought this. And I always thought if I got one of these cars, I would only ever buy it in a manual. And then I drove her car, and it was just a totally different experience. And it wasn't necessarily that it was a better experience. It was just a different experience that I had not yet had. And I thought, you know what? I would really like to have a car with this type of technology. I want to experience it. I know it sounds silly, but like I want to master that. Just because there's paddles on the steering wheel doesn't mean there's not some like learning curve and minor skill involved, especially when it comes to just knowing how to operate these transmissions. Because remember, with a manual gearbox, it's all in your head. Whatever you say goes. When you want to shift, it shifts. When you want to roll off that clutch, you roll off the clutch. When you want to clutch in and coast into neutral, we're not going to go here because he's going to go there. You can do that. And with these gearboxes, you're at the mercy of what it thinks you're going to do. And that does take some adaptation. And I wanted to be able to drive cars with any transmission and be good at it and be sympathetic to it and know that I wasn't going to harm it, know that I could drive it smoothly. But the other reason I chose the DCT for the E92 M3 is because I don't really like the manual gearbox in this car. It feels like an afterthought. And don't get me wrong, it's not a bad gearbox. What I'm saying is that gearbox does not feel special. It does not feel like, ooh, this is an M gearbox. It feels like it was taken out of every other BMW, and that means it's par, it's okay. If you've ever driven a B7 RS4 Audi, that's where you start to learn what a beefy, nice, like incredible transmission feels like on a car that should be designed for that thing. They aren't all equal. Not every manual is good. For example, the Hyundai Genesis G70, or I guess it's just the Genesis G70 now. It was neat. It's kind of like, it reminds you of the old days when you get like an E39 BMW, you get a 540i, that's a nice like luxurious car with a stick. So that was fun, except for the fact that it's not a good gearbox. So like, what's the point, right? Like, don't half-ass it. And that's where Porsche comes in, because they don't half-ass it. They give you good gearboxes. But saving the manuals isn't just about buying the manuals. It's about teaching people to drive them. If you want to save the manuals, you need to have other buyers. You're one person. But as one person, you can teach a dozen or 20 or 30 people how to drive a manual. And maybe those people will enjoy it enough to go buy one. Because you're one person, I don't have enough money to go buy 10 manual cars and make my big statement on save the manuals. These puddles are unreal. So the most important thing you can do is teach people. And this is where that machismo really starts to fail you. So the tactic of belittling men who drive automatics or DCTs, that's not gonna do you any good, because then those people are gonna either like dig their heels in and like their DCTs more and keep buying them, or they're not gonna wanna learn to drive a manual because they're afraid that they're gonna be bad at it and you're gonna make fun of them even more. Like, that just doesn't help. So instead of like complaining and making fun of people who don't drive a manual or don't know how to drive a manual, teach them how to drive a manual. Those people will enjoy it. And if they're enthusiasts, they're gonna buy an enthusiast car that has a manual transmission. Pretty simple, right? We did this with my friend PTSRS, Will Lee. He said, you know what? It's time. I need to learn how to drive a stick. We rented a car on Turo because I wasn't about to teach him in the M5 or in the Porsche. And we got him driving a stick. Now we can drive a stick. It's great. But there's still something to be said for the joy of a DCT. It's not all boring. It's not all lame. It's a fun thing to operate, and that's why people like them. So let's talk about the other end of the spectrum, because sure, an M3, we're looking at somewhere between $20,000 to $35,000, depending on the car and the year and all that stuff. But what about like supercars? Is everyone who drives a 600 LT like a little girl? Is everyone who drives an Enzo a little girl, to those save the manual purists? I would be hard pressed to say that. That's insane. Formula One drivers haven't driven manual transmissions in years. On Winding Road Magazine, the other channel that I work with, I drive incredible cars all the time. I've driven an 85 Vantage Euro. I've driven a Euro Dino. I've driven a Testarossa. I even drove a 1960 Ferrari 250 GT Pininfarina Coupe the other day. Like, what on earth? That's basically the Ferris Bueller car with a slightly longer wheelbase and no convertible. Wow. Those cars are all manuals. And they make sense as manuals because A, whatever automatics were available in those times would have been garbage, but B, it's all about the emotion. Cars today are like lacking that emotion, but the fast cars, the ones that still have emotion, the supercars like Ferraris and McLarens, even like an AMG GT, those cars just make no sense to have a manual gearbox. It would upset the performance, because remember, now it's a numbers game. It's about those 0 to 60 times. It's for those guys, it's about those 0 to like 120 times. If you're hustling a 600 LT around a racetrack and you're setting respectable times, to scoff at that and say like, oh yeah, but he doesn't row his own gears. That's just crazy talk. You do need to have like a manual in your life regularly, because it is a skill and it's like riding a bike, but just like riding a bike, you get a little rusty. There's times when I'll drive this car for a very long time without shifting my own gears in a manual transmission, namely in the winter when the Porsche is not out and the M5's put away. I get back in and yeah, my heel toes are a little sloppy. It's just, it takes a little time to get back into the swing of things. And every car is a little different anyway, but I will say, if you're not driving a manual transmission regularly, there are certain things that you master that you need to just keep up with. So my recommendation is, if you're somebody who like has one car, maybe it's a good idea to have that one car be a manual. But if you have a couple cars and your fun car is the manual gearbox, like, yeah, by all means, drive your, like, God forbid, CVT Nissan to work every day if that's just the way you're doing it. But you do need to keep current. And newer cars, unfortunately, while they do listen to us because they're giving us manual transmissions, they're also doing kind of lame things where they're neutering the experience just a touch, because I'll use my blinker so I don't get yelled at even though there's not a soul around. I love that I'm doing this whole save the manuals thing in a DCT. They neuter the experience by like auto rev matching and stuff like that. And I always find it weird with Porsche especially. There's like a little Manatino, I forget what they call it, but the thing on the steering wheel that says, oh, it's in sport mode, it's in whatever mode. The sport mode, like the cooler modes, the exciting modes, that's when the rev matching is on. Like you don't have to do it yourself. So they do make it so like people who are learning manuals on modern cars won't even understand why a heel toe would ever need to be done if you've only driven those, because you'd be like, what are you talking about? I put my foot on the brake, I clutch in, I shift, it rev matches. They don't know, like they won't know. So that's why you as an individual with all of your class and experience and sophistication and skill, yes, you need to go out and teach people how to drive a manual. Teach them how a gearbox works. Make sure they understand why you need to rev match. God, this engine sounds good. So if you take away anything from this, A, cut the macho attitude. It's not gonna make your any smaller because you're not shifting your own gears. Just do your thing, enjoy it. 2, if it drives you nuts that kids today don't know how to drive manuals and they've got all these stupid flappy paddles, go teach someone. Whether they rent a car or you've got a car that you're willing to teach someone, that's how this works. You have to teach people how to do it. Otherwise, they won't want to do it, or they'll be too afraid to do it themselves. Not many people learning to drive a manual gearbox, unless they're like super dedicated car enthusiasts, are going to go rent a manual transmission car. They won't even be able to get it out of the parking spot. So that's on you, that's on us. That's our responsibility for the future. Teach kids how to drive a stick. But other than that, I think automakers will continue to give us the enthusiast cars, the Civic Type Rs, the GT3s, the Miatas, the BRZs. Those are all cars that are fantastic and really appropriate with a manual transmission, especially the GC86. That's a car that I never really understood why people bought that automatic. But frankly, people who have it have said it's actually a pretty good automatic, but I haven't driven one. So I'm being a curmudgeon. I'm being that guy. That car belongs as a manual. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, share the passion, teach someone how to drive a stick.